This is my true story. I gave my life to a woman I loved. For decades, I worked long hours, built a business with my bare hands, and placed everything in her name so she could live proud. I thought my loyalty meant safety. But one day, she turned her back on me. She walked away, married my boss, and in front of others, she called me poor. The woman I sacrificed for humiliated me. But what she forgot was simple. The $3.1 million business was never hers. It was mine. Tell me, if the person you gave everything to betrayed you this way, what would you have done? Subscribe so you don't miss how I answered her betrayal. I worked my whole life under another man's command. Every morning I woke before the sun, tied my worn boots, and walked into the factory gates where my boss waited with his clipboard. I followed orders, lifted heavy loads, stayed late when asked, and never once complained. My pay was small, but I dreamed bigger. I dreamed of giving my wife something that would carry her name, something that would make her proud to stand beside me. So, while I worked long shifts for my boss, I saved in silence. Every spare dollar from my wages went into a secret plan. I skipped lunches, wore old clothes, and fixed my shoes with glue rather than buy new ones. The world saw me as poor, but inside I was building something that would one day change everything. It started small. A rented corner shop, a signboard I painted by hand, and a notebook where I tracked every sale. At first, I did it all myself, stocking shelves, sweeping floors, counting coins at night. But soon, the shop grew. People liked my honesty, liked that I kept fair prices, liked that I never cheated. Business grew slow but steady, and with every month, I put more away. My wife stood by my side at first. She smiled when I brought home receipts. She said I was building her a kingdom. I thought those words meant she was proud. I thought loyalty was shared. I placed the papers in her hands once, told her the business was hers too. She cried, hugged me, and called me the best husband a woman could ask for. I believed her. I believed her so deeply that I registered the business in both our names, though the deeds and founding papers still carried mine. I wanted her to feel secure. I wanted her to feel the pride of owning something built with blood, sweat, and patience. I thought giving her ownership would mean she'd always stand by me, that she would never betray the man who gave her everything. But loyalty is not built in papers, it is built in hearts, and some hearts do not stay true. I thought she would see me as a man who carried her through hard years, who skipped meals so she could eat, who bent his back so she could stand tall. Instead, she began to see me as less. The more the business grew, the less she looked at me with gratitude. She wore new clothes while I stayed in the same old shirt. She ate at fine tables while I carried my lunch in a tin box. She loved the shine, not the sweat. And soon, she began to treat me as though I were not the builder, but the burden. I gave her a roof, a business, a life. I gave her everything I had, but in her eyes, I was still the man who took orders from my boss. She forgot that while I stood under another man's command by day, I was building her future by night. She forgot that without my hands, there was no foundation. She forgot the truth written on every deed, that my name was the one that mattered when it came to the business she loved to flaunt. I built her a life, but she chose to use it against me. And that was the beginning of the betrayal that would burn me cold inside. At first, it was small things. She stopped thanking me when I came home late and placed money on the table. She stopped asking how my day was, stopped caring about the sweat that soaked my shirt. Instead, her eyes followed my boss when he visited. At dinners, her tone grew sharper. She would say, "Some men bring home scraps, others bring wealth." My boss would chuckle, raise his glass, and nod as if the words pleased him. I sat there in silence, pretending her words were jokes, but each one cut deeper than any knife. I noticed she wore brighter clothes when she knew he would be there. Perfume she never wore for me. Smiles that lasted longer than they used to. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. Love makes a man blind when he does not want to see the truth. I convinced myself it was harmless, that she only admired his success. I reminded myself that I was building her success too. But the look in her eyes was not admiration. It was hunger. Hunger for more than I could give. Hunger for the life she thought I could never provide. Then the whispers started. Neighbors spoke of how close she seemed to my boss. Workers told me they saw them laughing together when I was not around. I ignored it. I said nothing. I believed loyalty would hold, that vows meant something. But deep down, my heart began to tighten. I could feel betrayal forming in the shadows, even if I could not yet see it clearly. The change in her eyes was the warning. She no longer looked at me as her husband, the man who built her life. She looked at me as a man who was not enough. And my boss, the man I worked under every day, began to look at me with a smirk, as if he knew something I did not. Their smiles matched too easily. Their laughs echoed too long, and the space between us at the dinner table grew wider than any ocean. I knew something was coming. I just did not know how far their betrayal would go. The night it became clear, I will never forget. My boss held a company party, bright lights, music, glasses of wine clinking together. I wore my old suit, the only one I had, pressed clean with my own hands. I walked in proud enough, thinking I still had my wife by my side. But she did not stand beside me. She stood beside him, my boss, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her face glowing with a smile I had not seen in years. I froze in the doorway. Everyone else kept talking and laughing, but for me, the whole room went silent. She raised her glass, her eyes sweeping across the crowd, and then she said it. Some women marry for love. I married a poor man, but at least I learned how to climb higher. Her voice was sweet but sharp as glass. People turned, heads shifted toward me. I stood there, holding a small plate of food, and every face seemed to stare through me. My boss grinned wide, enjoying her words, enjoying my humiliation. He clinked his glass against hers as though they shared a secret toast. Laughter followed. My own co-workers, the men I stood beside in the factory, laughed softly into their hands. Some looked down, ashamed for me. But the damage was done. In that moment, I was not a husband, not a builder, not even a man. I was the butt of a joke at my own boss's table. And worst of all, it was my wife, the woman I had carried through life, who had put me there. I swallowed hard. My face burned hotter than the lights above. I wanted to shout, wanted to tell everyone the truth. That the business she flaunted, the life she enjoyed, was built from my blood and sweat. That the deeds, the documents, the roots of it all still bore my name. But I said nothing, because silence can be stronger than words. A man who speaks in anger looks weak. A man who waits in silence builds power. That night, while she stood with my boss, laughing at me in front of the crowd, I made my decision. They thought they had stripped me of pride. They thought their betrayal had broken me. But betrayal only sharpens a man when he still has one thing left: the truth. And the truth was simple. The business she paraded was never hers. It was mine. The night after the company party, I went home alone in my thoughts. My wife did not ride back with me. She left with him, my boss, her new partner in laughter. I walked through the dark street, my steps slow, my hands shaking but not from drink. I had not touched a drop. The shake came from something colder. The humiliation of being called poor in front of the same people I had worked with for years sat like a stone in my chest. My body burned with shame, but my mind turned to something sharper: the papers. When I reached home, I did not turn on the lights. I walked straight to the old wooden chest in the corner of the room, the one where I had kept all important things for decades. It smelled of dust and old ink, but inside lay the truth that no one else in that party knew. I pulled out a folder of documents: deeds, contracts, receipts, registrations. My fingers traced the faded edges. Each one bore my signature, not hers. The truth was black and white. The business she paraded as her crown was still mine. I remembered the day I had first signed those documents. My hands were strong then, calloused from factory work, but steady as I placed my name down in ink. The lawyer had told me, "Always keep your name on the root paper. You can add others above, but the roots must be yours." I had listened. Out of love, I had added her name for show, for comfort, so she could tell people she owned something. But the roots, the bones, the very life of the business, they all remained under me. She never cared to read those papers. She only cared to enjoy the results. I sat with those documents spread out across the table, candlelight flickering across each page. My mind replayed her words. I married a poor man. Poor? She wore clothes bought by my sweat. She sat in cars paid for by my sacrifice. She drank wine poured from bottles I could never afford for myself, but only for her. And yet she called me poor. But paper does not lie. Paper held the truth that she forgot. Paper said her pride rested on my foundation. The next morning, while she was still laughing somewhere with him, I walked to the lawyer's office. He was an old man, older than me by some years, but his eyes were sharp. He remembered me. He remembered when I came to him first, decades ago, asking how to set up the company. He looked at me now, weary but calm, and asked what had happened. I told him everything, the betrayal, the humiliation, the marriage to my boss, the words that cut me like knives. He listened quietly, then asked the question that mattered most. Do you still hold the original deeds? I placed the folder on his desk. His eyes scanned each page slowly. Then he leaned back in his chair and gave me the answer that froze my heart, not in pain, but in power. It is still yours, he said. Every root paper is signed by you. They cannot take what was never given. Those words echoed louder than any insult. I had been called poor in front of the world, but here in this office, the truth sat between us on a desk of wood and ink. The empire she bragged about, the crown she wore on her head, the pride she carried when she stood by my boss's side. It was all built on something she did not own. She thought betrayal had given her power, but in reality, betrayal had blinded her to the truth. I asked him what could be done. He said the law was simple. The business was still in my name. I could sell it. I could transfer it. I could shut it down if I wished. The power was mine. My hands, worn and tired, still held control over everything she flaunted. My wife had walked away thinking she had stripped me of dignity. But she had walked away from the man who still carried the throne beneath her crown. That night, I returned home and looked at her as she came in late. Her perfume smelled of another man's car, another man's touch. She smiled as if nothing was wrong, as if the words she had spoken at the party meant nothing. She looked at me like I was small, like I was already erased. I said nothing. I carried no argument, no shout, no plea. Because I knew something she did not. I knew the business she thought was hers was already slipping from her grasp. I watched her for days after, watched how she flaunted her life. She went to dinners, posted pictures, told friends that she had climbed above me by marrying my boss. She thought the world believed her story. Maybe they did. Maybe the world thought I was broken, humiliated, finished. But the world did not see the folder of papers in my drawer. The world did not know that every coin still bent back to my name. Each night, I opened those documents again and again, not out of fear, but out of strength. They reminded me of one thing. Betrayal cannot erase truth. She could laugh. She could call me poor. She could marry my boss. But she could not change the black ink on those papers. She could not take the fact that every foundation, every root, every contract rested on me. The more I looked, the calmer I became. My anger turned to cold resolve. I did not need to argue with her. I did not need to prove myself in front of her friends. The law was already on my side. The truth was already mine. All I had to do was wait for the right moment to act. She thought betrayal had won her everything. She thought marriage to my boss meant victory. She thought calling me poor meant she was rich. But the truth sat in quiet papers, waiting for me to use them. And that truth would cut sharper than any insult when the time came. Because when the crown she wore was ripped away, she would realize it was never hers to begin with. After the lawyer confirmed the truth, something inside me changed. The fire that had burned hot with anger turned cold. Cold is stronger than fire. Fire burns out quick, but cold stays, sits in the bones, and makes every step sharp. I did not shout at her. I did not argue with my boss. I did not go to the party halls or the factory floors to tell the world the truth. I simply walked home with a steady pace, carrying the folder under my arm like a soldier carrying his weapon. For years, they thought I was weak because I stayed quiet. They never knew that silence was not weakness. Silence was patience. That night, as I sat across the table from her, she mocked me again. Her words rolled off her tongue like poison. Some men build. Some men beg. You only beg. My boss had given her a gold bracelet that now sparkled on her wrist, and she flaunted it in the candlelight as if it proved she had chosen well. She looked at me like I was a shadow in the corner, already erased. I chewed my food slowly, swallowed, and nodded. I gave her no reaction. Inside, though, I repeated the lawyer's words. It is still yours. The power of those words gave me calm. Power does not always come from fists or loud voices. Power comes from knowledge, from truth hidden in plain sight. She thought she had humiliated me beyond repair. But what she did not understand was that humiliation can be endured when you know what lies beneath the surface. I endured because I knew the crown on her head was fake. It glittered, but it had no weight. In the days that followed, I walked to the office of the lawyer again and again. We reviewed the contracts slowly. Every clause, every signature, every small note at the bottom of the page was read with care. He explained each one in simple words. Here is your ownership. Here is the clause that proves she has no legal right. Here is the stamp that binds it all. I listened, nodded, and felt the calm grow deeper. The betrayal hurt, yes. The humiliation stung, yes. But the law was like a shield around me, and the papers were the sword I carried quietly. At home, she continued her performance. She wore new clothes, ate at restaurants, laughed loudly on the phone with friends. Sometimes she even brought my boss into my home, sat with him in the living room while I stayed in the kitchen, invisible in my own house. They whispered, chuckled, and looked at me with smug eyes. I let them, because I knew what they did not. They were sitting in comfort built on ground that was about to crack. I began to make small preparations. Nothing loud, nothing rushed. I opened a new bank account in my name only. I arranged meetings with potential buyers quietly, men who had been circling the business for months. I asked the lawyer to prepare sale papers in silence. Each step was measured, each move made with care. I carried the weight of decades, but my steps were lighter now, because every step was aimed at the moment of truth. At night, while she slept in another room, I sat awake under the faint light of a lamp, writing notes. I wrote down dates, names, numbers. I made lists of what needed to be signed, what needed to be filed, what needed to be sealed. It was not rage that guided my pen. It was discipline. Betrayal makes a man angry, but patience makes him dangerous. I was not planning to fight them with words. I was planning to erase their laughter with action they could never undo. Sometimes I looked at her while she slept. I remembered the woman she used to be. The woman who once called me her hero when I brought her bread after a long shift. The woman who once cried when I first registered the business in her name. But that woman was gone. In her place was someone who mocked, who betrayed, who humiliated. And beside her now stood my boss, the man who once barked orders at me, who now smiled at my wife like he had taken both my family and my pride. They both thought they had won, and in their eyes, I was already defeated. That made my silence even stronger. The resolve inside me grew colder each day. I no longer felt the burn of shame the way I did at the party. Instead, I felt steady, calm, sharp. They believed betrayal was final. But betrayal is not final if the betrayed man still holds the last key. I held the key. The key was the paper. And paper was stronger than their words, stronger than their laughter, stronger than their marriage. One evening she said to me, "You have nothing left." "I have everything." Now I looked at her, nodded, and answered simply, "We'll see." That was the only sentence I gave her. She thought it was weakness. She laughed, but in that laugh was her blindness. She had no idea that her entire world rested on my signature. That night, I made my final promise to myself. I would not scream. I would not beg. I would not demand respect from people who had already chosen to spit on it. I would use the law. I would use the papers. I would use patience. And when the time came, they would lose everything they mocked me with. I sat by the window, looking at the dark sky, and felt something I had not felt in years. Control. Betrayal had tried to take it. Humiliation had tried to bury it. But the quiet truth of those documents gave it back to me. My resolve was no longer about proving myself to them. It was about reclaiming my dignity for myself. They could laugh now, but soon silence would be my answer, and that silence would be louder than any insult. The lawyer told me the next step was simple: prepare the sale. But for me, nothing about it felt simple. It was not just paper and ink. It was the cutting of a rope that had tied me to her for years. It was the final act of taking back what was mine and leaving nothing for the two people who had laughed at me as though I were dirt under their shoes. I walked home that day with the file under my arm. My steps were slow, but my mind was sharp. Every detail mattered now. One mistake, one loose word, and the plan could fall apart. I began the preparations quietly. Nobody in the house knew. She sat at the table with my boss, planning trips, laughing, making toasts with wine that I had paid for, in a house that I had built. I moved in silence, unseen, unheard. I went to the office of the buyer. He was a businessman who had asked about the company many times before. He knew its value. He knew it was solid, clean, and worth more than most people could handle. When I walked into his office, his eyes lit up. He leaned forward and asked, "Are you ready now?" I nodded once. We spoke about numbers. The figure was $3.1 million. It was not just money. It was dignity. It was justice. It was the weight of my years being counted properly for once. I listened as he explained his terms, his plans for the company, his vision for its future. None of it mattered to me. My interest was not in what he would do. My interest was in what she would lose. Every word of his plan was just noise compared to the silence I would give her. The papers were drawn up quickly. Lawyers know how to cut with ink. They know how to seal a fate with one clause. I made sure the documents were airtight, every page signed, every witness present, every stamp placed with care. I did not smile. I did not frown. My face was blank, but inside I felt the steady beat of a man who had waited too long for this moment. Betrayal can shatter a heart, but revenge rebuilds it in another shape. At home, she continued her mockery. "You are poor now," she said, while showing off the bracelet my boss had given her. "You are nothing." She said it loud, as if she wanted to see me break. But I did not break. I washed my hands, sat at the table, and ate my food. Each bite tasted like patience. Each swallow carried the taste of a secret. I wanted to tell her then, to look her in the eye and say, "You are about to lose everything." But that would have ruined the power of the silence. The silence was stronger than any speech. In the nights that followed, I rehearsed the steps in my head. Wake up, go to the lawyer, sign here, check the bank account, secure the transfer, make sure the buyer's payment clears. Each step was written down in my notebook, as plain and simple as a shopping list. But it was not groceries I was preparing for. It was freedom. It was the closing of one life and the opening of another. I remember sitting by the window one night, the lamp low, the folder on the table. My hands rested on the cover of the file, and I thought about all the years I had carried her sickness, her needs, her wants. I thought about the nights I stayed awake so she could sleep, the times I skipped meals so she could eat, the way I worked long shifts so she could live without worry. And then I thought about the moment she stood beside my boss, called me poor, and laughed. That laugh echoed in my mind. It was not just laughter. It was a knife. And this file, this sale, was how I pulled that knife out. The buyer called me again and again. "Are you ready?" he asked. Each time, I said the same thing. Almost. Because I knew I had to move at the perfect time. Revenge is not about speed. Revenge is about precision. If I acted too soon, she might suspect. If I waited too long, she might find a way to stop me. The moment had to be exact, like the strike of a clock. Finally, the day came. I woke up before sunrise. She was still asleep, my boss's name fresh on her lips even in her dreams. I dressed quietly, put the file in my coat, and walked out into the morning air. The city was quiet, the streets empty, as if the world itself was waiting to see what I would do. When I reached the lawyer's office, the buyer was already there. He looked at me like a man who had waited his whole life for this deal. We shook hands, and the lawyer laid out the final papers. My pen moved slowly across the page. Each stroke of ink felt like a nail being driven into the coffin of betrayal. With every signature, I closed a door she could never open again. I signed the last page, placed the pen down, and exhaled. The lawyer stamped the papers, the buyer smiled, and the deal was sealed. The company was no longer mine, but it was no longer hers either. It was gone, forever, out of her reach. By noon, the money was in my account. $3.1 million. It sat there like a mountain, heavy and immovable, mine to take, mine to use, mine to vanish with. I stood in the office, looking at the numbers, and felt a calm I had not felt in years. She was at home, laughing at breakfast with my boss, mocking me as usual. She had no idea that her laughter was hollow now, that her pride was empty, that her throne had been pulled out from under her. That night, I returned home, and she smirked as always. "Did you work today, poor man?" she asked. I nodded once and went to bed. I did not answer, but in my silence was the truth she would discover soon enough. The sale was done. The money was mine, and her kingdom had already turned to dust. The morning it happened was quiet. The sun had only just started to rise, painting the sky in pale colors, soft and cold. I woke before her, as I always did. For years, I used to wake early to prepare her tea, to iron her clothes, to make sure she started the day with ease. But that morning was different. I did not move to the stove. I did not reach for the teapot. I moved straight to the drawer where the folder sat, heavy with the weight of everything that was about to change. She was still asleep. Her breathing was shallow, restless, as if even in her dreams she chased comfort. I looked at her one last time, not with love, not with anger, but with a kind of emptiness. The woman I once loved was gone. The woman who had walked beside me in sickness and health had vanished long ago. What lay before me now was a stranger who had betrayed me, mocked me, and given her heart to another man, my own boss. The pain of that betrayal had burned so deep inside me, but now all I felt was cold. I slipped into my coat, tucked the folder under my arm, and stepped outside. The air was crisp, the streets empty, the world hushed as though it too was waiting for what I was about to do. Each step to the lawyer's office was steady, deliberate. My shoes struck the pavement like a drumbeat. One step closer to the end, one step closer to freedom. At the office, the lawyer was already waiting. His glasses sat low on his nose, his desk covered in papers. The buyer was there too, a man with sharp eyes and a firm handshake. He looked at me with hunger, the hunger of someone who knew this was his chance. He had wanted the business for months, and now I was ready to give it to him. The lawyer spread the final documents across the desk. The buyer leaned forward, eager. I sat down slowly, placed the folder beside me, and pulled out the pen. My hand trembled for a moment, not from fear, but from the weight of everything. This was not just a sale. This was the closing of a life. This was the cutting of ties that had strangled me for years. I signed the first page. The sound of the pen scratching across the paper was sharp in the quiet room. Each letter I wrote felt like a nail driven into the coffin of betrayal. The buyer smiled, the lawyer nodded, and I moved on to the next page. Line by line, signature by signature, I stripped her of everything she thought was hers. At that exact moment, she was at home, sitting at the breakfast table with my boss. I could picture it clearly. She would be laughing, pouring coffee, talking about how poor I was, how lucky she was now that she had found a real man. My boss would smirk, proud, thinking he had stolen what was mine. They did not know that the very ground under their feet was already gone. They were laughing on a floor that no longer belonged to them. I signed the last page. The lawyer stamped it with a heavy hand. The buyer leaned back, satisfied, his smile wide. "It's done," he said. His words fell into the room like a final verdict. I placed the pen down, exhaled slowly, and closed my eyes. For the first time in years, I felt light. By noon, the money was in my account. $3.1 million. Numbers filled the screen on the lawyer's monitor. My name. My account. My money. Secure. Final. Untouchable. The business was no longer mine, but it was no longer hers either. She had lost it forever. Back at home, she was still mocking me, still telling stories, still laughing, still calling me poor. She had no idea her kingdom was gone. She had no idea that by the time she put her fork down, she was already nothing. I returned home that evening, calm, silent. She looked at me with contempt. "Did you make any money today, poor man?" she asked, her voice sharp, dripping with sarcasm. My boss chuckled beside her, arm on her shoulder, smug in his victory. I looked at them both, nodded once, and went to bed. They thought I was beaten. They thought I was powerless. They thought they had won. But by then, everything was finished. The business was sold, the money was mine, and the empire they laughed over was nothing but ashes. That night, as I lay in bed, I listened to their voices downstairs. Their laughter was loud, careless, cruel. But I smiled in the dark. For once, the laughter did not cut me. For once, the laughter meant nothing, because the joke was not on me anymore. The joke was on them. The shock came fast, like a storm without warning. The next morning, she dressed as usual. Fine clothes, jewelry I once bought, perfume that filled the air. She walked with pride, chin high, certain the world still belonged to her. She drove to the office with my boss beside her, the man she betrayed me for. She thought she was walking into her empire. She thought she was the queen. But when she arrived, the world she knew was already gone. At the front desk, her keycard failed. She swiped again, harder, the small red light blinking back at her like an insult. Confused, she turned to the receptionist, demanding answers. The receptionist, a young man with tired eyes, shifted uncomfortably. "I'm sorry," he said. "Your access has been revoked." She laughed, certain it was a mistake. She raised her voice, louder, sharper, until the manager arrived. And then the truth unfolded. The manager explained calmly. The business was sold. Yesterday. The new owner has taken over. You no longer have any authority here. His words fell like stones. I wish I could have seen her face. My wife, the woman who mocked me as poor, the woman who called me weak, the woman who thought she could betray me and walk away untouched, standing there frozen, her power stripped in one sentence. Her eyes darted to my boss, searching for help. But even he looked pale, stunned. He had married her for status, for wealth, for the comfort of what he thought she owned. Now he realized he had married nothing. The crown on her head was made of paper, and I had set it on fire. She tried to protest. "That's impossible. This business is mine. Everyone knows it's mine." But the manager shook his head. He pointed to the documents, the stamped pages, the signatures. "It was never yours. It was always in his name. He sold it. It's done." She screamed. Rage poured out of her in front of everyone, employees, clients, even strangers who had gathered to watch. The woman who once laughed at me was now begging, pleading, humiliated in the very halls where she once pretended to be powerful. My boss tried to hold her arm, tried to calm her, but his face told the truth. He was already thinking of himself, already pulling away from her. He had married a queen, but now he was chained to a pauper. He saw his own reputation falling with hers, his own pride dissolving into shame. The man who laughed with her at my expense now realized he had tied himself to a sinking ship. By noon, the news had spread. Employees whispered in corners, phones buzzed with messages. The city began to talk. She was finished. The woman who once called me poor, the woman who mocked me in public, now stood empty-handed. Her humiliation was complete. My boss, the man who stole her heart, realized he had gained nothing but ruin. Their empire collapsed in a single day. And where was I? Gone. I was not there to see it, not there to hear her cries or watch her pride burn. I had no need. My silence was louder than any words. My absence was heavier than any presence. While she screamed in front of the world, I was already miles away, free, untouchable. That was the collapse, swift, brutal, final. She lost the business, the money, the respect, the image she built on my back. My boss lost his pride, his position, his illusion of victory. Together, they were left with nothing, nothing but each other, and even that was poisoned by shame. When the business was gone and their faces turned pale with shock, I was already far away. I had planned my exit for weeks, step by step, detail by detail. The moment the deal was signed, I knew there was nothing left for me here. I had no reason to stay in the same city where betrayal sat in every corner, where her laughter haunted every room, where my boss's shadow followed me like a curse. No, I needed to vanish, not to hide in shame, but to live in peace. That morning, while they drove to the office, I carried one small suitcase. Inside, only the things that mattered. My passport, a few clothes, my documents, and the quiet savings from the sale. No furniture, no photographs, no reminders of the life they had poisoned. I locked the door behind me one last time and did not look back. I walked slowly, not with panic, not with fear, but with calm. I was not running away. I was leaving with dignity. At the train station, I bought a ticket under a name they would never search. The platform was crowded, filled with strangers, and I melted into them like smoke. No one noticed the old man with the suitcase. No one cared, and that was my power. Invisibility. For years they mocked me. For years they watched me. For years they used my life as their entertainment. Now they would not even know where to find me. As the train rolled out, I stared out the window at the city fading behind me. The streets, the buildings, the office towers, all of it shrinking into the distance. Somewhere across town, my wife was screaming, my boss was panicking, their empire burning, and I was gliding away, carried by steel and speed, my silence louder than their cries. It was the sweetest kind of freedom. From the train, I moved to the airport. The ticket was ready, the passport stamped. My flight was booked to a country where no one knew my name. No one would ask me about her, no one would laugh at me, no one would point and whisper. I would be just another traveler, just another man beginning again. I sat at the gate, listening to the hum of people around me. Families hugged, businessmen typed on laptops, children cried. And I sat still, my heart steady, my hands calm. For the first time in years, I felt no weight. Not of her sickness, not of his orders, not of their laughter. I was empty, and that emptiness felt like wings. When the plane lifted into the air, I closed my eyes. I imagined her at the office, trying to force her way in, shouting at lawyers, demanding answers. I imagined my boss trying to salvage his pride, scrambling to explain why he tied himself to a woman who had nothing left. And I smiled, not with joy, not with triumph, but with quiet justice. They had each other now, and nothing else. By the time the plane touched down, I was already gone. My name erased from their lives, my shadow removed from their world. No address, no phone number, no trail. I had vanished, and in vanishing, I had won. They would spend years searching for someone who no longer existed in their world. Their anger would have no target. Their regret would have no answer. Their shame would echo in empty rooms. That was my disappearance. Not loud, not violent, not messy. Silent, clean, irreversible. I did not leave to hurt them more. I left to heal myself. The man they mocked was no longer there. The man they betrayed no longer lived under their control. I was gone, and that, to me, was the final revenge. I sit now in a place where no one knows my past. The air is clean, the mornings are mine, and the silence does not hurt me anymore. I think back to the faces of those who betrayed me, her eyes full of greed, his grin full of arrogance, and I feel nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not longing, only stillness. They destroyed themselves the moment they chose betrayal over loyalty. I did not have to lift a hand in violence. I only had to use the law, the papers, the truth of my ownership. They mocked me, they laughed at me, They called me poor. But in the end, I was the one who walked away rich, free, and untouchable. The business they flaunted is gone, sold to strangers who never even knew their names. My wife, who left me for my boss, is now married to nothing but shame. My boss, who thought he could stand taller by stepping on me, now stands in ruins, holding the hand of a woman who has nothing left to give. Together, they are bound by emptiness. Together, they are trapped in the very cage they built for me. Their punishment was not a strike, not a shout, not a war. It was silence, my absence. I remember the man I used to be, the man who worked double shifts, who carried bags heavier than his body, who thought that sacrifice would be enough to buy love. That man was broken when betrayal arrived. But another man was born, one who knew the value of quiet revenge, one who knew that walking away can be sharper than any knife. That man is who I am now. I do not live in luxury. I do not need to. My wealth is my peace. My treasure is my freedom. My power is knowing that they cannot reach me, cannot find me, cannot ever humiliate me again. They are trapped in their failure. I am free in my calm. Final thought. She married my boss and called me poor. She forgot the $3.1 million business was in my name. I sold it and vanished forever. I did not just disappear from their lives. I erased myself from their reach. And in doing so, I found the only wealth that truly matters: freedom.